Hello and welcome to our lecture on Gaining from Trade, Absolute and Comparative Advantage. This is from Chapter 4, Section 3 of our Economics Alive textbook. An important concept in this section is opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is defined as the next best thing you give up by doing something else. If I told this woman that I was going to buy her a shirt, she didn't have to pay for it, she would have a choice to make. Does she want the purple shirt or the green shirt? If she chooses the purple shirt, her opportunity cost is the green shirt because she gave up getting the green shirt when she chose the purple. Opportunity cost is the next best thing you give up by doing something else. Another concept we'll talk about in this chapter is specialization. Go ahead and define it in your own words in your notes right now. Economists define specialization as when workers become highly skilled at specific tasks. When we become highly skilled at specific tasks, we can produce more. And if we combine specialization with trade, everybody can have more. If we look at a situation on a desert island in the middle of the ocean, this may make more sense. Let's say Mr. West is stranded on a desert island, and there are only two sources of food on that island. There are turnips, and Mr. West can collect 40 of them in a day. Or he could spend his entire day collecting clams, and he could collect 40 clams. Or he could collect some combination of the two, perhaps 20 and 20, so that he has at least a little bit of both. On the other side of the island is one of your classmates. And this student, who is younger, faster, and a better worker than Mr. West, has better eyesight, can collect 120 turnips in a day and 60 clams in a day. Or the student could collect some combination thereof so that he has at least a little bit of both. He needs a little bit of clams or a little bit of turnips every day. So if we look at their total production, we see that the student can produce more turnips in a day, which means he has an absolute advantage, and the student can produce more clams in a day, which means he has an absolute advantage in clam production. The student has an absolute advantage in both of those things because he can produce more with the same amount of resources. Using the same land and the same time, the student can produce more turnips or more clams. An absolute advantage might also mean that somebody can produce the same good with fewer resources. But in this case, it means that the student can produce more turnips in the same amount of time or more clams in the same amount of time. 300 years ago, almost all economists would say that the student should stay to one side of the island, ignore Mr. West, not help him out, not trade with him, and the student would eat better as a result because he has an absolute advantage. But then an economist by the name of David Ricardo began to look at what each person gives up. Let's start with Mr. West. If Mr. West gathers only turnips, he can collect 40 of them, but he loses the opportunity to gather 40 clams. So if we reduce this, for every one turnip Mr. West collects, it costs him one clam. Economists would say that Mr. West's opportunity cost of a turnip is one clam. Let's look at clams. If he gathers only clams, he can get 40 of them, but then he loses the opportunity to gain 40 turnips. So for every one clam he collects, it costs him one turnip. Therefore, the opportunity cost of one clam is one turnip for Mr. West. Now let's look at the student. If the student collects only turnips, he gets 120, but that means he does not have the chance to collect 60 clams. If we reduce this, it comes down to every one turnip costs him 0.5 clams. If he gathers only clams, he can get 60 of them, but loses the chance to get 120 turnips. As a result, the opportunity cost for the student of collecting one clam is 2 turnips. So if we look at their opportunity costs, in turnips, Mr. West can collect 1 turnip at a cost of 1 clam. The student can collect 1 turnip at a cost of half of a clam. In clams, Mr. West can collect 1 clam at the cost of 1 turnip. The student can collect 1 clam at the cost of 2 turnips. Going back to turnips, the student's opportunity cost is lower, and therefore we say in turnips, the student has a comparative advantage. This is different than an absolute advantage. Comparative advantage means he has a lower opportunity cost. In other words, he gives up less to find turnips. In clams, however, it's a different story. Mr. West has a lower opportunity cost, and therefore Mr. West has the comparative advantage in clams. Remember, the student had the absolute advantage in both turnips and clams, but that doesn't matter when we're talking about comparative advantage. With comparative advantage, we only look at opportunity cost. Since one has a comparative advantage in turnips and one has a comparative advantage in clams, they could both benefit by trading. If they work by themselves and they do not specialize and they do not trade, Mr. West might collect 20 turnips and 20 clams, and he would eat those 20 turnips and 20 clams. And the student might collect 90 turnips and 15 clams, and he would eat those 90 turnips and 15 clams. But if they specialize and work together, they might decide eventually, after some haggling and maybe some trading where they work out the rate, if they decide to trade 17 clams for 25 turnips, this is what would result. Mr. West collects only clams. The student collects only turnips, and then they trade. As a result, Mr. West ends up eating 25 turnips from the trade. And he eats 23 clams. Now, he collected 40, and he traded 17 away, but that's still 3 more than he was able to eat by himself. He also gained 5 turnips as a result of trading. The student, after the trade, still has 95 turnips and 17 clams now. So the student has gained 5 turnips, and the student has gained 2 clams. The main point is that everybody gained in all 4 categories. No matter what, since they have different comparative advantages, if Mr. West and the student specialize, they are both going to end up with more total food, regardless of how much they produce on their own and what combination of clams and turnips they produce. If they specialize and then trade, if they trade at the appropriate rate and amount, they will both gain in their total amount of food. Comparative advantage has an impact on the global level at a larger scale. Certain geographic regions or certain countries have comparative advantage as a result of geographic features. They might have more resources. They might have a different climate. They might be located next to other countries. And these can lead to comparative advantages. But other factors like education or wage levels or technology differences can give a country a comparative advantage. If we look at the United States, we have a comparative advantage in advanced technologies, such as computer software. And that's because we have a highly skilled, high-wage workforce. Your average American worker is going to give up less if they spend the day working on computer software than workers from say Vietnam. A worker in Vietnam has a comparative advantage for assembly line work, like manufacturing clothing. The average Vietnamese worker is going to give up less than an American worker if they spend the day working in a factory producing clothing. You can probably think of other countries that have comparative advantages on your own. This concludes our lecture on comparative advantage, absolute advantage, and making gains from trade. Again, this is in section 4 of, one second. It's in section 3 of chapter 4. You can find this information in that section of the book if you have further questions. Thank you.